Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, joining you from the lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations, recently known as Victoria, BC, Canada. I'm delighted to welcome back to the show my esteemed and beloved mentor, Dr.Cyndi Brannen. She's one of the world's foremost Hecatean experts, and her recent book, Entering Hecate's Cave, is now available in stores and online. This is Cyndi's fourth book and her third time on the Numinous Podcast. And when I tell you I got this book and I could hardly breathe, it's the truth. I saw my own name on the back cover with an endorsement, and I'm not kidding. I choked. I gasped so hard. I mean, I knew they'd asked me, hey, would you read an advanced copy, and if you'd be willing to write a blurb, that would be great. But my name is on the back of her book. It's like the honor of a lifetime. It's such an honor, truly, to know Cyndi and now to share with you just how much I love her insights into Hekate as a guide in our trauma recovery. Cyndi invited me to one of her gatherings of the Kovina Institute, which is her online membership community, where they do their Hecatean practice. It's a year-long thing. Highly recommend it. You should get on her newsletter list so you know when they open up registration. It's limited number of people can be in the community at a time. Anyway, they had a gathering for the book launch of her book, Entering Hecate's Cave, The Journey Through Darkness to Wholeness. And so I got to be in the in crowd for a little while, and I was invited at that gathering to interview Cyndi about the journey through darkness to wholeness, but also about her own journey as a scholar and an author. So Cyndi, what identities do you lead with now?
Well, Carmen, since the last time we talked on your fabulous podcast, what identities I lead with now, I think I just did a episode on the Keeping Her Keys podcast with the amazing Coyote May on Hekate, gender, and queerness. So I have been thinking a lot about my place at that crossroads and that intersection. So I would say my queerness and thinking about gender is kind of what I've been leading with personally. And then, of course, having a new book come out, the author identity comes back to the surface because it's been a few years since I've had a book come out. So right now, I think those two are big. And I think you might be able to relate to this one personally as well. My youngest son is soon graduating high school. So the motherhood role is changing. So those are the three big ones for me right now.
It may have been a few years since one of your books came out, but honestly, it's been busy the last few years. You have Keeping Her Keys, and then we were in Entering Hecate's Garden, and now here we are for Entering Hecate's Cave. These three books seem to be guiding us along a larger narrative arc, but maybe there's more too. So just for folks who are new to your work, how do you see these three books fitting together?
Thanks for asking that question, because since Hecate's Cave came out a couple of weeks ago, that's been one of the most popular questions that I've been asked, like, which book do I start with? Is there an order? And they're three really interrelated books, but very different books. So the Keeping Her Keys book, I called it an introduction to Hecate's modern witchcraft. And it is a survey of different personal development techniques merged with ritual and some natural magic. And of course, devotion to the great goddess Hekate herself. So that book gives you a little bit of everything. The second book, Entering Hecate's Garden, is my offering to the green world and the practice of what I would call holistic herbalism, that combines magic as well as the physiological and psychological applications of different plants. So it contains monographs for 39 different botanicals, and also sections on kind of the deeper side of plants, more into working with the spirits of the plants, and then also quite a bit on practical applications of working with plants. And then the new book really is my, I want to call it my testament. It's my testament to my own journey. It's an offering to my students that I've taught over the years. And it is really like a form of devotion to Hekate as well. I feel like there is so much of me and my journey in entering Hecate's cave. And it is really that deep dive into merging psychology with Hekate and the deeper world of spirits and natural magic and so on. So in terms of like, which book should you begin with? I would say begin with the book that has the most vitality for you. If you are called to deep shadow healing and you have survived significant trauma in your life, perhaps entering Hecate's cave will help you. Of course, it doesn't replace therapy or other forms of treatment. If you are just curious about Hekate, the Keeping Her Keys book is really great because it gives you a little bit of everything. I designed it as a course that you can work at over a year. And then if you, like me, love the spirits of the green world and really want to reconnect to plants and your natural magic, then entering Hecate's garden is for you. But you're right, there is a larger story. I am spinning book by book, which is, certainly for me, a lot of it is about revisiting ancient mythology and practices surrounding the goddess Hekate and other mythic figures associated with her, like Medea and Circe. In Hecate's cave, it's really centered around Persephone and Demeter, and Hekate is another trio. So for me, a lot of it is reaching through the mists of time to revisit these stories and find, the psycho-spiritual aspects of the stories that we identify with as a mechanism for connecting to what's so much greater than us, but also lives inside of us. Those are the keys.
Is there a clue for those of us who are big fans and have been for a while in the motif of the trio and the two books having matching covers? Is there a third that goes with them?
There could be.
Is that all you're going to tell us?
There is definitely a third book in the works, although I may take a sidestep and write a slightly different book first. We'll see how the year goes. Entering Hecate's cave was a long time coming, and I may need a little bit of a break from book writing.
I hear that. That actually makes sense for the year that we're in right now. We're in a chariot year, we're in a 7-year. It's kind of like, here's the end of a cycle. And so maybe there's a pause, but I know that those of us who are aware of, well, you have 4 books actually altogether, but that these two seem to be building something. And I'm very curious about the sort of the emergent or the reborn queen archetype, which I'm going to ask you about near the end of our interview. But we'll revisit this question because I know longtime fans want to know more.
I suspect you know where I'm going.
Great. So, yeah, your books, certainly we're lifting up Hekate, but there's something, it's, very personal. It seems as we're reading these books and we arrive at entering Hecate's cave, it's true that you're sharing more of you yourself. But what is important to you personally about representing Hekate well. She's been a lot of the books spend a lot of the time, and particularly this one, talking about how she's been misrepresented and how there are so many facets to her that you're trying to illuminate, not just the shadow aspects that have been so distorted by the patriarchy. Why is that so important to you that she in particular is represented very well?
This is such a great question. And I don't have like a kind of cognitively developed, well thought out Gemini style answer for that. I have a very Scorpio ascendant. She called me, I answered, it feels right, and I do it. That's my answer. I mean, whenever I can usurp the patriarchy, and I enjoy the deeper world. I found healing there. I love writing about it. And, I think if we did want to psychologize this a bit, I think from my own journey, feeling unheard and misunderstood, I think there are parallels there. And, my work in academia and in healthcare, so many stories of many women, because I worked a lot in women's health, but also many others who are marginalized, how their stories too are often twisted into a narrative by the power structure. And so perhaps part of what I'm doing is rectifying how I feel that so many of us have been wronged. And Hekate is an amazing spirit to connect with when we feel that we have been, denied, marginalized, criminalized, all of these things. Because not only is she very powerful as a force, but that she also knows what it's like.
Mm-hmm. Can you remember a specific time, maybe when you were working in women's health, or when that was happening, when you were misunderstood or being distorted somehow? And if the present day you, who's been walking with Hecate for a long time, could go back and say something to earlier you with a message, is there a scene that you can remember where you would go back now and like whisper in your own ear to help you through that?
There are many, and I think a lot of us, especially maybe women of a certain age, but many others as well too. When I was an undergrad, I was like a young single mother and a very non-traditional student. This is back in the 90s, very non-traditional to be a young single mother. Had a high demand child who, needed me, and I was working and doing all of this and going to school. So I think when I went back to university in that context, my whole experience was often very othering. And in particular, I'm going to just tell you the thing that comes to my mind, Carmen, and this professor is deceased, so I'm going to speak ill of the dead. Um, but this particular professor, who was the department chair in the psychology department where I did my training, had this cartoon on his office door. Take a breath, just take a breath here for a minute. Okay, everybody take a breath. He had this cartoon on his office door, and it was a picture of a gingerbread man, like the cookie,
Mm-hmm.
with his crotch bit out of him. Oh, it gets better when I'm not done. And on the edge of the bed, there was a witch, in the stereotypical Halloween garb, eating the cookie.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could go back and visit that younger Cyndi, I would, instead of saying anything to her, I would rip that effing cartoon off that door. Because here we are, 25, 30 years later, I still think about that cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe everyone who's listening or watching can relate to having those kind of experiences when it's just like who you are at your soul is vilified in a joking way and just how completely powerless I felt in that moment. Like I didn't rip the thing off the door, and I would go back and rip that thing off the door. Would you help me, Carmen? Would you
Oh
watch down
man.
the hallway, make sure nobody saw me?
Oh, no. I'd knock on the door, we'd open it, I'd pull it off, hand it to you, and you would rip it in front of his face and throw it down.
Yes.
Do it.
Yes, we would, right in front of him.
That's right. Exactly.
See, even now, I carry some residual fear in that, well, then I would get kicked out of the program.
Mm-hmm.
He had a right to be offensive. I did not have a right to be offended.
Right. Exactly. Which aspect of Hekate would you call on for that fear to help you?
I would call on Brimo, Brimo, which means fierce, terrifying. There really isn't an English word equivalent of Brimo, but if you say Brimo and perhaps soften your gaze into your candle, you can feel her. She is that rightful anger, we carry. She is that fierce one. She is that moment when your loved ones are threatened and you will do anything to save them. That is the spirit of Brimo. Brimo was sorely lacking then.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for invoking her now in this moment, but also through these books. So yeah, let's go back to the 90s a little bit. I think we are not now, but hopefully entering the age of nuance. Where we recognize that there's like none of our icons are perfect, they're all imperfect. As we've become more aware of capitalist, imperialist, white supremacist patriarchy, now we like see how we've been so conditioned by it in so many ways. But I will say that there are aspects of the books that I read in the 90s that are still very dear to me. And in this book, Entering Hecate's Cave, more than once you quote from James Hillman's book, The Dream in the Underworld, which was so formative for me. And it's a book I actually picked up maybe 3 years ago, like found a paperback in a little free library and like picked up again, was like, yeah, no, this guy was great. Like still love him. And in my blurb on your book, I place you in that lineage. Maybe actually for folks who don't already have the book, I'll read a bit of my blurb, which is, with entering Hecate's cave, Dr. Brannen has firmly placed herself among the great psychospiritual researchers and teachers of our time. This book can rest proudly on the shelf alongside titles by Jean Shinoda Bolen, Marion Woodman, and James Hillman. With this work, Brannen secures her place and Hecate's among the best resources for trauma-sensitive and spiritually oriented healing for our times. I've said it before, I say it again, I really do mean that. As I was reading this book, I kept thinking, Goddesses in Every Woman by Jean Shinoda Bolen. Even more than your other two Hecatean titles, this one I was like, yeah, this, and I read that in high school, 1991 or something like that. If each one of those goddesses had had somebody researching and telling her story, like this is what these books feel very much in that lineage. So as great as all those psycho-spiritual authors and therapists are, what do you think they missed that Hecate really wanted to make sure that you carried into this present time and the coming decades? Like, what do you hope to add to this lineage of psycho-spiritual therapy with your work?
Oh, wow, that's such a great question. Where do I kind of find my space in that question? I read those books too back in the 90s and early 2000s. And I really wanted to revisit them because I felt like that lineage has kind of fallen out of like a more popular discourse. That although spirituality in general, we have so many books now, paganism, witchcraft, there's so many books, and I certainly haven't read them all, but when I kind of surveyed what was available about Hecate, I felt that something was missing that I wanted, which was that deeper understanding. And so I went back to a book that had been so healing for me called The Dark Night of the Soul by Thomas More. And in that book, if you haven't read The Dark Night of the Soul, my friends, you need to read that book. So Thomas More, way back in the day, when that book came out, he was on Oprah. Um, and I read the book for the first time then, and probably didn't pay much attention to the passage on Hekate. Was interested, but not really took much notice of it. And then when I, probably 15 years ago, like I revisited that book, and then I discovered that Thomas More was James Hillman's best friend. Did you know that?
I didn't know that. I'm gonna have to
Explains a lot, doesn't it?
The soul off the shelf, and yeah, exactly. Right? It does explain a lot.
And then so I went back to James Hillman and really started to understand the dream of the underworld. And at the same time, I'd been doing more research on Hekate and kind of stumbled into the Hekate of the Neoplatonic philosophers, like Proclus, and in the Chaldean oracles, where Hekate was anima mundi, soul of the world. She was this great mediating force, and all the beauty that I found there. And so I felt like there was a lot missing, although Hillman certainly approached that in different books, not just this book, but he has another book on anima. I felt there was a lot of ground that didn't get covered. And I also had this, and it might be a personal bias, but even like I love Jean Shenolda Boland's work. And in The Goddesses and Older Women, she does talk about Hekate, but I kind of felt like she was missing the boat a little bit. And then in my study of in-depth psychology and, like in Jungian psychology and how they talk about myths and archetypes and all of this, I always kind of felt like a little affronted. They either didn't leave out Hekate or they talked about Hekate as she was like, I call her Macbeth's Hekate.
Right.
Or she was Macbeth's Hekate. And often in depth psychology and Jungian psychology, the archetype of the witch is treated the same way. And all of the beauty of witchcraft as like a healing path for wholeness and for healing others, really, I didn't see a lot of that in those books. And certainly and Hekate tended to be very kind of flatlined. And at the same time, I had done this research and discovered that there was a lot more to Hekate than what was kind of being presented within psychology, but also presented in like paganism and witchy books and New Age books. However, like Thomas More and James Hillman got her right. And I thought that was very interesting. And so I wanted to write a book that was certainly like an homage to James Hillman and the great Marion Woodman. But even Marion Woodman, I've listened to so many of her audio recordings, and you can get them on Audible. So I've listened to hours and hours of her audio recordings, and she never kind of goes all the way into the cave. And I know, in terms of therapy, like a Jungian or another type of analyst in that kind of occupation, they might say, well, you can't go safely deep unless it's one-on-one. And, through my teaching of the course that this book is based on, which is known as Lampadia, which means basically the lamp bearer, the torch bearer, I knew like there are ways to safely apply this because, my training is as an applied social psychologist. So this is what my career has been, is taking things from therapy and finding aspects of it and reinventing it in a way that people who don't have thousands and thousands of dollars to spend on this type of therapy, that they can still benefit. So, that was kind of like just coming together and wanting to really honor the lineage of Marion Woodman in particular, and James Hillman as well. And also, this might be a little like kind of coming in. We're inviting an unexpected spirit into the room, but also Elena Blavatsky. You know, because when you look at her work and what she did, and she is definitely like one of my spiritual ancestors that I honor, that she's so misunderstood and misrepresented. Even during her lifetime, she became vilified and, you know, was the target of a real witch hunt, you know, to prove that she was a fraud. However, as a philosopher, as a theosophist, as a thinker, as an innovator, she brought to the Western mind so much that today is so embedded in our culture, and she never is acknowledged as the one who brought these ideas to the West. For example, yoga. You know, she was really involved in bringing yoga to the West, and most of us love our yoga. So, you know, for me, it was part of this is honoring those spirits that I feel have been somewhat unacknowledged in a very more open way. This is why I wanted to include like quotes. You know, I start my opening acknowledgments, like I include a quote from a theosophist because I wanted intentionally to bring that energy into what I was doing. And then I of course honor Woodman and Hillman and Thomas More, who is still alive and well and writing his books. But I wanted to bring their spirits into that book because I think there's a depth there. And in terms of like theosophy, there is a depth of the way they think about the nature of the universe and human experience that to me harkens back to what those ancient Neoplatonic philosophers like Proclus and the authors of the Chaldean oracles and others, what they were trying to explore and examine from their perspective 2,000 years ago, which in some ways was different than ours, but in some ways not. We are still trying to understand the nature of our existence and trying to find a way to be our whole selves, to be whole onto ourselves. So
that dimensionality that you bring really stands out to me. That you know, those writers that we just cited may have mentioned Hekate, but it was always in a shadow aspect, as ugly, distorted, contorted, like a something aversive. Whereas what you bring is that depth, that dimensionality, all these facets that it seems to me Hekate as a misunderstood being, it would be really important to set the record straight. So it's and much as I you know, I love James Hillman, Thomas More as well. Those are very, you know, I still talk about the oakness of the acorn from learning that notion from James Hillman when I was a teenager. So this is no disrespect, but it's like they spoke to the extent that they can. Someone being misunderstood or somebody having a dimensionality unrecognized by the culture, you know, like I just think as like, you know, kind of privileged white man people with lots of education and success, you know, a lot of validation by, you know, in multiple spheres of society. There are aspects of Hekate that they just can't touch or can't reach in the same way that somebody who, say, was a single mom in academia in the 90s as a young mom can. So that dimensionality really leaps off the page. I do want to stick a little bit with a section here where you are quoting James Hillman from Dream in the Underworld and talk about Hekate, the filth eater. So he writes, "The junk of the soul is primordially saved by Hecate's blessing, and even our trashing ourselves can be led back to her. The messy life is a way of entering her domain and becoming a child of Hekate. Our part is only to recognize that there is myth in the mess, so as to dispose of the daily residues at the proper place, that is, to place them at Hecate's altar. And then you go on, you link from that, you bridge to catharsis and healing, and talk about Hecate as the filth eater is one face of the great mother who accepts our waste. Then you're talking about miasma and kind of dealing with the dirt and facing our shadow. And then you lead into shame as miasma and the hidden infection and the aspect, Borborofora, who is a willing consumer of this insidious disease of shame. Akin to shame is that sense of vulnerability and being seen. I'm not worthy. I'm not ready. Who am I to write a book like this? Who am I to become a Hecatean researcher and scholar? I imagine I'm projecting onto you. But I'm very curious, what rituals do you invoke when you hit that edge where in your pursuit of success, you meet some kind of hidden shame, maybe you thought you dealt with, you know? And so how does this aspect of Hecate, the filth eater, still show up for you no matter the level of success you attain?
Oh, this is such a delightful question.
Oh, good.
So Borborofora comes from a collection of magical and ritual fragments known as the Greek magical papyri. And like Brimo, when we say Borborofora, there is a vitality to it that travels across the centuries. And even if you don't know what Borborofora means, when you say it, you can feel its power. So that is one of the chapter titles from this book. For me, it's interesting because where I teach the ritual cycle in my school, every fall when we do this ritual, which is the Scorpio new moon, I spend lots of time in advance, of course, prepping for this and doing my own catharsis work. And it's an ongoing process. There are layers. I would say, a lot of the things that I used to be resentful of, be really wounded by, from my past, from the upbringing that I had, I don't carry any of those things anymore. But, when there are still things that light up for me, like the gingerbread man with his lack of crotch and the witch eating it, they don't carry the same gravity that they had 20 years ago. But I do, there are issues around shame that I certainly struggle with. Body image has been a big one my whole life. And even now, I will catch myself. There was something funny the other day. So I have a hot tub. I'm fortunate enough to have a hot tub. Live here in the country. Hot tub is in like a barn-like structure. It's not even outside. There's no one here to see me. And recently I was in the hot tub and I was doing things a certain way as though someone was watching me. And then I was like, there is absolutely no one here, Cyndi. Like it's you, the deer, the bobcat, which I am afraid of the bobcat. There's me and the wildlife. There's no one here. And then so for me, I've really been exploring like that sense of being self-conscious, which I think is so connected to shame. It's like, because when we've been othered a lot in our lives. So me, I've always been really short and curvy. That's my natural state of being. And, that can lead to a lot of othering. And so I still, it's like, how can I be less self-conscious? It's kind of where I'm landing in my own shame journey now. Because shame is like that visceral, acute pain. And this as a somatic practitioner, like we hold it in our bodies. And, it just is such a weight. And then I think for me, as that is lightened, it's become this awareness of being self-conscious And I really don't want to be self-conscious anymore. You know, if I'm out in the world, I don't want to think, um, I don't want to think about like how I'm presenting myself out in the world. I just want to present myself the way I want to present myself and then not think, you know, when a new book comes out, it's like, you know, what are the right things to say to promote it? You know, like all of those kind of things. And with this book coming out, you know, I've just really been, I'm just going to be 100% honest and authentic, and kind of lead with what's really important to me. I did this really goofy unboxing video. I don't know if you saw, did you see
I
that
did.
goofy
Yeah, it's cute. It's
in my
very
pajamas?
genuine.
And I, because, you know, it's like, well, do you need to be like serious Dr. Cyndi for people to take your very serious book seriously? And then I thought, I don't believe that. I believe my readers and followers and students and the people listening to your podcast are very intelligent and they know that we're multidimensional. And, you know, people like you and I who do this very serious work, they know that we're not just super serious all the time, um, helping people heal from their trauma, that sometimes we can be goofy too. And that,
Totally.
so
Totally.
that's why, you know, I wasn't going to share it. And then I, you know, like the publicist, I'm like, what would the publicist say about this? And then it was late at night and I was like, I'm just going to put it on Facebook because I love it. Um, and then the publicist was really, she's like, she liked it too
That's
after I
so
did it.
great.
So I don't think a publicist would say, "Oh, definitely do an unboxing video in your pajamas where you throw bubble wrap at the fireplace with glee and abandon."
But this leads me to, I think, well, just as you lead us through the book to seek the gifts of Hecate, or at least to experience. It's a glimpse into the gifts of journeying with her through the cave. It's the return, right? It's the emergence. And you write near the end that, you know, humans are programmed to seek the transcendent. And that sort of leads us into the chapter of the reborn queen. So how would you describe some of the gifts and rewards that people could hope for or might expect as we emerge from Hecate's cave after journeying with her?
Well, for me, it's about finding that sense of wholeness, like that you are, it's acceptance of the past, it's an embracing of all of yourselves, and, you know, like to use some IFS language. Um, it's
Internal
living,
family systems for listeners who don't know what
yes.
that is. Yeah.
I was just about to do that. I was like,
Oh,
so
sorry.
we need to do like the 2-minute IFS explanation. Just Google it, internal family systems. It'll help.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, it's from living from the center of our being, and it's that sense of being like safe in your own skin, even when the environment around you is not safe.
Mm.
That you are on your own side. That you know, like, beloved, I am here for you. You know, which I think is a comes from a Buddhist teacher, but I forget who it is now. But you know, it's like, but when you say, beloved, I am here for you, you're saying that to yourself, all of
Mm.
yourselves. We are in this together and we are working to be safe and whole and wise mind, you know, to borrow from dialectical behavior therapy. You know, we have that wise mind
Mhm.
where we're making the best interest
Mhm.
and working on developing secure attachment, of course, because many of us who have significant trauma, have a huge difficulty trusting anyone else because of our early childhood, adverse experiences. So to be the reborn queen, the reborn Kore, is to emerge like Persephone from our time intentionally in the underworld of Hecate's cave, you know, conversing with our shadow with love and acceptance and not trying to kill our shadow, but to tame it by listening to it and learning from it. It is that sense of being who you are and just being safe in your own skin. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would like to end So we always have the same last question, but we've heard how you cope with grief and rage in your first time on the podcast. We've heard the second time where you're finding joy. This time, I'd love to end by hearing, where are you finding the transcendent these days, Cyndi?
Where do I find the transcendent these days? Well, I'm going to tell you a story. So I mentioned earlier that I have this hot tub, and I call it my cauldron. So I have a very transcendent, deep experience with this hot tub. It is obviously a luxury item. I live very simply. My house is very simple, but I do have this really nice barn structure built on the side of my house that is very lovely. It's the mess. It is like the rest of the house is good, and then you go out there and it's like, oh, and I call it Hecate's porch, because that's her role as Propylaea and so on. The titles associated with gates and threshold. It can also be translated as porch, right? So I call it Hecate's porch. And for me, I soak in that, I have my sacred smoke and my candles. There's a whole thing. And just something about being so in that water, where I do have so much chronic pain, that being in that water, and I'm short, so I can actually like spread all the way out like I'm in Shavasana, like laying flat corpse pose in this hot tub and float.
Wow. I'm just imagining you being alchemized in the cauldron, Hecate's cauldron, that somebody else would be like, oh, she's having a little hot tub. But you're actually involved
I'm out there
in
with
this
the
deep
smoke,
alchemical
and I'm
process.
floating, and I'm chanting, and I'm just transcending, listening to music. There's this song by Alanis Morissette called Her. I don't know. Do you know that song?
I don't think I know it.
It's so transcendent. You'll love it.
Okay.
And I think the most potent transcendent experience I've had in recent memories was just listening to that song on repeat and really connecting to that energy in the hot tub and just letting go of that self-consciousness, that sense of self, and just being in the flow of the moment and connecting to the spirits of the land. For me, that's so important, to call the elements, to honor the elements, and just feel that connection. And like looking over the Atlantic with the woods around, and just, I live in a fairly wild place. It's not overly civilized. So for me, that experience is just so transcendent. And then it's also just those little moments. Like when we had that eclipse, that lunar eclipse recently, I don't know. I was just up super early and standing in the middle of the little one-lane road that we live on, trying to get pictures and see the eclipse. And I had a rough bout of COVID, and then I'd gotten bitten by a brown recluse spider. So I had a really rough year anyway, it was a bad year physically. Things happened. And I had still really been struggling with like the fatigue and everything of that, because I had said, it'll take you months to recover from this brown recluse spider bite, because I had necrotitis. It was necrotized. It was a mess.
Jesus.
And so then that moment when I was just really experiencing that lunar eclipse, like I came back, it was transcendent. I came back in and I was changed. I haven't been nearly so fatigued since.
Wow.
So yeah, that's where I find the transcendent. And then of course I have, like with my students, we do our rituals, and so I get to kind of have this secondary transcendent experience where I guide them through deeper practices. And I have those experiences too, but I'm very much like, making sure things are going well for them and being the leader. So that's transcendent, but definitely the cauldron and the moon. I think the cauldron and the moon always will be my source of transcendence.
Oh, I'm never going to have a hot tub in the same way again. I mean, I firmly believe in overlaying the spiritual on our daily tasks and ritualizing them. But that is very compelling.
It's the cauldron.
Very
it's
alluring. Yeah, I want to get in the cauldron for sure.
Right?
Transform me. Thank you so much for sharing about your book and also for, brave. I know I'm asking you questions about like where would you place your work among some of the great minds of the last century of psychotherapy? It's like, it's kind of a big ask to ask you to do that, but I really appreciate you going there because, it's like we're standing in the future and calling the present to us. And I'm really hoping that it doesn't take too long for the masses to recognize where you are in the order of things with this kind of work, with the psychospiritual lineage. It's been so important to me personally. I'm sure I, speak for many, your students and readers. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being brave and stepping in with Hekate and revealing her to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I highly recommend you get not only entering Hecate's cave, but I think the trifecta of keeping her keys, entering Hecate's garden, and then entering Hecate's cave. I really highly recommend you do that. They're great reference books. They have many, many rituals and poems and invocations. If you do any kind of ritual work, you're going to find these excellent references you'll turn to again and again. Find today's show notes at numinouspodcast.com, where I'll link to Cyndi's website, the Covenant Institute, her books, and also Cyndi has a podcast, the Keeping Her Keys podcast. My listener shout out today is, again, a thank you to all of you who have written reviews on Amazon and Goodreads or Indigo if you purchased online in Canada. It's so important. This is what we do these days, right? If you're like, oh, somebody recommended a thing to me, you Google it, you see what people are saying about it. So reviews are really, really important for recommendations so people can find it, but also every time you go in and you write a review or you give it some stars, it keeps the algorithm interested in my book. So if you liked The Spirited Kitchen, I'd be so grateful if you'd take a couple minutes to review it. So this is a review that is titled Beautiful Resource for Seasonal Ritual and Feasting, and it's by Sheila Soni. When I first got this book and read the introduction, I teared up. I could really feel the care that the author poured into creating this book. I appreciate that it is thoughtful and has depth and richness in its discussion of seasonal lore, practices, and recipes. I also noticed the nuanced discussion of ethical considerations, and it makes it a keeper for me. I anticipate that I will use it both as a reference for seasonal practices and lore, and to dive deep into particular rituals or recipes. The recipes are detailed and slightly elevated from what I normally make, so they feel special to share with my loved ones. Thank you, Sheila. I love that review. Thank you, thank you. Deep appreciation. Okay, one thing before I go, I'm doing something different this spring. I've got 2 giveaways happening exclusively for my newsletter subscribers. So on February 28th, I'm drawing a name from my subscriber list to win a Witch's Apothecary gift box. It's got ingredients for all your spellcraft needs. They're things that I have grown from seed, that I have processed. It'll be really special and lovely, this beautiful gift box with 24 botanicals from my garden, a pendulum, a selenite wand, a rose and damiana tincture made by my friend Nikaya of the Red Moon Mystery School, other little goodies. It's going to be so beautiful, packaged by me for you. So I'm drawing that on February 28th. Then on March 28th, I'm drawing again from my newsletter, and this one has more of a collapse theme because I'm starting my Collapse 101 course in the Numinous Network this year in February. So Collapse 101 starts in February, and the Numinous School of Intuition starts in March, but the draws are kind of reversed. So the February 28th draw kind of goes with the launch of the Numinous School, the relaunch of that happening in the network. This one is like about a month after Collapse 101 gets started. I'm doing the draw. So the draw for that is this incredible emergency kit for your car. It's the Popular Mechanics collaboration kit with mymedic.com. MyMedic, I'm not getting paid I'm not being sponsored by them, but I wish I was, because My Medic is an excellent source for really intuitive and easy to use first aid supplies. So this is the car kit. It has the things that you would need for some kind of roadside emergency. It's worth about like $140 US. So this is really worth being in. So all you have to do is get on my newsletter. I'm going to draw the witchy one February 28th, the collapse one March 28th, and I hope you win. Sign up at the bottom of my website to get on my newsletter at carmenspaniola.com. CarmenSpagnola. Until next time, take care.